A couple of weeks ago, I published a video in which I demonstrated how to use space-lab ignition in order to add reverb to a Dolby Atmos object. And in that video, I said that there are many different ways on how you can do that. Essentially, everything that you need is a reverb that can handle immersive audio, and then you would separate out the dry signal from the wet signal, send the dry signal into the object and the wet signal into the bed, and that's pretty much it. Now, as it turns out, that was a little bit too optimistic. It's actually not that straightforward, and the reason for that is not because it is complicated in any way or the workflow doesn't work. It is just because there aren't that many tools out there that can actually do what we need them to do. So what I decided to do is create another video where I show you a different version or a different way on how to approach reverb for a Dolby Atmos object. And this is what we're going to do today. But first of all, hello everybody. In case you're new here, my name is Michael Wagner. I teach at the Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. And if any of those topics interest you, I invite you to subscribe or join my Discord community. An invite link is in the description below. And since you're already at it, please don't forget to press the like button because we all have to do that at one point in our life. The tool I'm going to use today is DearVR Pro from Dear Reality. Now, this is not exactly a cheap plugin, but I do know that many viewers of this channel already have that in their plugin arsenal. Now, if you don't have it yet, please be aware that we need the Pro version and not the music version. So there are two versions of this plugin out there. We need the Pro version because we need to have access to the multi-channel capabilities of that particular plugin. So if you want to try it out, make sure that you download the correct one. The way I'm going to approach this tutorial is pretty much exactly the same way I approached the tutorial where we used space-lab ignition for that purpose. If you have not seen that yet, there's a link in the description below, but it's not really necessary to watch that before you watch this one. This one is completely self-contained. Now, the DAW that we're going to use is Cubase. You could also use Nuendo. It works in exactly the same way, and everything that we're going to do today should be easily transferable to any other digital audio workstation that is capable of handling Dolby Atmos. So let's get started. So here's my little project, and all I really have is a loop. Now, the loop that I'm using here is a loop that came with either Cubase or Nuendo. I'm not completely sure. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this loop and going to turn it into an object in a Dolby Atmos project, and then we're going to add reverb to that particular object with the help of DearVR Pro. So let's have a quick listen on how that loop sounds. So it's essentially a basic loop, and as I already said in the previous video, what I essentially tried to do is I tried to find a loop that has a little bit of interest and at the same time is as dry as possible so that we get a little bit of a better feeling of what the reverb is actually doing. So the first thing we need to do is we need to turn it into a Dolby Atmos project, and for that we need to make a couple of adjustments. So let's first go into the project and let's add a Dolby Atmos Bus. Now the Dolby Atmos Bus is a 7.1.4 track. I'm going to use a group track for that purpose. You can also put that into the control room. I said a couple of times that I'm not doing that primarily because of the way I use my digital audio workstation, and I would have to constantly switch that around. So it's easier for me to just use a group track. But if you are constantly working with Atmos and you have a very stable setup, then by all means, please use the control room for that purpose. But once again, I'm just going to use a group track here. So let's add a group track. It's going to be a 7.1.4 track. Let's call that Atmos Bus. It's going to hold our Atmos renderer. And then we need to add a Atmospad. So let's add another group track. And this time, this group track has to be a 7.1.2 track. And let's call that an Atmospad. And let's make sure that the output is sent into the Atmos Bus. So let's add that one. Let's just move that up to get it organized a little. And just for the moment being, let's just also route the loop into our Atmos setup so that we can monitor everything correctly. We're going to change the routing a little bit later, but just for now, let's just add the routing, and currently it's not routed anywhere. So let's out that into the bed so that we actually have some action on all the tracks. And let's just see if we still hear something. And yes, we do. So the next thing is we need to add the Dolby Atmos renderer to the Dolby Atmos Bus. So let's do that. So let's open up the inserts in the Atmos Bus and let's add the renderer as an insert. The easiest way to do that is simply to search for Dolby. We're going to search here, and here we have the Dolby Atmos renderer. And then we need to connect everything, and the way to do that is to go into the project settings, go into the ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos. We need to select the renderer. In Cubase, you only have one option, which is the internal renderer. If you're working with Nuendo, you have multiple options here. But once again, in our case, we just have this one. So let's just choose the renderer for Dolby Atmos. And then let's add the bed. We're not yet going to add the object. That's something that we're going to do a little later. But let's just add the bed. And let's add the Atmospad here. And that completes this setup for a moment. And if we now play that, we should actually hear the object that we have, or the loop that we currently have in our little project, show up in the bed. So essentially the left and the right channel. So the loop that we're having is currently routed into the bed, and the bed is then routed into the first 10 channels of the Dolby Atmos setup. So what we want to do now is, first of all, we want to turn the loop into an object, and then we want to add reverb to that object. And the easiest way to do that is to simply separate the dry signal and the wet signal, send the dry signal into the object and the wet signal into the bed. And that is exactly what we're going to do now. Now, there are a couple of different ways on how you can do that, and it depends a little bit on your personal preferences. The way I'm going to do that here is by taking the loop track and forwarding it into two separate group tracks. One group track is going to be responsible for the dry signal, and one group track is going to be responsible for the wet signal. You could also do that with sense and all kinds of things, but we will see that this is actually the most convenient way to do things. So let's add two stereo tracks here. So the first one is going to be the responsible for the dry signal, so that's going to be the loop object. So the output, let's send that into the bus, and let's call that, how do we call that? Let's call that loop object. Loop object. So we're going to send that here, and let's move that up to have that a little bit organized here. And then let's a second one, and let's send that. Let's already send that into the bed. That's going to be the one that is going to be responsible for the reverb, and let's call that loop reverb. And let's move that up here. So the object currently is already routed into the bus, and the reverb is routed into the bed. So what we need to do now is we need to take the original loop, and we're going to change the routing. Currently it's routed into the bed directly. What we want to do is we want to route it into the object as well as into the reverb. So we're going to actually route it into two different directions. So let's open up the routing, the direct routing editor. So we can actually select multiple routing destinations here. If you don't have that open, essentially you can simply kind of click that open here. So by essentially selecting direct routing, and it will actually show you that. So let's route that into the loop object, and let's select a second one. And let's the second one is going to be the loop reverb. And we want to enable both. So it essentially means that if we click on them, we only enable one. So what we need to do is we need to hold the shift key and click, and then we have sent it into two. So by shift clicking, you can essentially select multiple destinations here. So let's just check if everything is sent correctly. If I play that now, I have not yet connected the object to the actual object of the Dolby Atmos renderer. At the moment, it's just routed into the bus, but we should at least have action on those two tracks, and we do. Okay, so the final thing that we need to do is we need to take the object, and we actually need to route it into the renderer as an object. And the way this is done is by going back into the ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos, and we are going to add one object here, and the object that we're going to add is going to be the loop object, and that essentially should pretty much do it. It's now sent into channels 11 and 12 of the Dolby Atmos renderer. So let's see what we have. Now it's a little bit more, it has a higher gain obviously, because now we have the signal twice. You also see that the meter has disappeared. Once again, this is because the meter is shown post-panning. And the way the Dolby Atmos panner works is that it actually kind of takes the signal and sends it directly into the renderer. So there's no signal reaching the meter. If you want to see something happening here, you could change the global meter settings to pre-panning, and that would kind of take care of that. But for us, that is perfectly fine. Let's just open up the renderer and see if everything is going the way it's supposed to go. So we now have the 10 channels that are coming from the original setup that we had, and we have this additional object, and we now should see action on the first two channels in the object in the bed, and channel 11 and 12 as the two objects that we have. And this essentially doubles the signal. I should probably turn down the gain a little, so that you can hear me. Okay. Okay, so now we have the signal essentially duplicated, and what we now need to do is we need to simply take the signal that is sent into the reverb track and turn that into a 7.1.4 version of the actual reverb. And this is where DearVR Reality comes in. DearVR Reality is a plugin that allows you to simulate the reverberation in a particular room. And the nice thing about DearVR Reality is that it actually shows up in the panner, so we can actually simply switch the panner of the loop reverb to the DearVR Reality panner. So we're going to go into the loop reverb panner section here and right-clicking that, then we have the channel panner, and what we're going to do is we're going to select the DearVR Pro, and this will then open up the DearVR Pro panner. And if you now play that, essentially we already see the reverb happening. Now there's one thing that I need to mention here, that currently, and this is actually an issue that I found with many of those reverbs, because what they really do is they simulate the physical environment. They usually don't have a dry wet knob. Because quite frankly, in a physical environment, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. If you're simulating the way things are in real life, there is no dry wet knob that kind of allows you to change the amount of reverb that you're getting in a particular room. So they usually don't have that. But what the DearVR Pro setup has, it actually has a separate gain knob for the original signal. So what we can do is we can simply turn down the gain, and that will take out the original signal and will just forward the it will essentially just forward the wet signal. So let's turn that down completely. And now what is happening is that we have the reverb sent through the reverb track and the original object sent to the object track. So let's first check if the signal that we are getting at the renderer is actually a 7.1.2 signal. So let's open up the renderer here again, and let's play that again. And essentially we see that we're still only getting two channels. And the reason we're only getting two channels is because we have not yet set the output for the DearVR Pro reverb plugin. So essentially here the output format is currently set to binaural. That's not what we want. We actually want to have the full 7.1.2 signal. And this is actually one of the things where DearVR Pro is really nice, because it has a lot of, I should probably kind of move that over here a little. It has a lot of different options. So what we need is we need the 7.1.2 as your output. So let's see if that now changes things. And indeed it does. So now we have the reverb going through all channels. We have the additional option to send some signal into the LFE channel. This is something a lot of viewers constantly ask, what is happening with the LFE channel? And here we can actually send some signal into the LFE channel if we want to. I mean, once again, the LFE channel is not necessarily used for that purpose, but you know, kind of if you want to, you can actually do that. And as we do that, we see that there's something popping up here in the LFE channel. The final thing that I should mention is that you currently hear a mono signal for the reverb, and the reason for that is because what it really does, or what DearVR Pro does, it kind of folds it down to a mono signal. You only have a mono panner here in the DearVR plugin. And the way you can select what you actually hear in that particular track or on that particular track is by selecting the input channel configuration. So we can either say that we want to just pan the left, or we want to pan the right, or we want to kind of mix that between the left and the right. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to fold that down to a mono signal by folding left and right channel. For our purposes, that is going to be fine enough. If you want to separate the left and the right channel and calculate the reverb and everything separately, what you will do is create a third track and essentially have one DearVR Pro plugin responsible for the left channel and one DearVR Pro plugin responsible for the right channel. But quite frankly, in most situations, this is probably not going to be necessary. Now, the nice thing about the DearVR Pro plugin is that it allows us to work with the reflections and the reverb separately. So let's just do that. And let's play around with the parameters a little. Now, in order to better get a sense of what is happening here, I should probably switch off the original object. So let's just mute the object here. Actually, I don't want to mute that one. So this is just the reverb now. So let's just make sure, let's go into the renderer and make sure that this is actually what we're hearing. Yes, so the object is muted and all we're hearing now is the actual reverb and the reflections. Now in the DearVR Pro plugin, you can work with those things separately. So you can set the gain for the reverb, you can set the gain for the reflections, you can turn them off or on. Let's just turn off the reflections and let's just play around with the reverb for a while. And we have different options here, so we can, for example, do, I don't know, a concert hall. We can change the gain. Now there's one thing that I'd like to point out here, isn't that if we now move the object around, so this is sort of the panner, and we have a three-dimensional panner. So we can either pan with X, Y, Z coordinate, or let's turn it down a little. With the X, Y, Z coordinate, or we can also kind of select the to work with polar coordinates. But if we move that around, you will actually notice that in the DearVR Pro plugin, the reverb doesn't really react on the positioning. So kind of if we are just using the reverb function, then the position of the object is almost unimportant for us. So we don't really need to work with that. However, the position will become important as soon as we add the reflections. So let's turn the reverb off and let's turn the reflections on. So if we now move that around. So the reflections essentially mean that essentially the reflections in the room. So this is sort of the idea that you're in a room and the sound reflects from the walls. Now we can actually calculate that in real time. So let's do that. And we can change the size of the room. We can change the left wall, bring that in a little. I'm clipping, sorry for that. Should probably put the gain down a little. The front and so forth. So we can play around with everything. And as long as we are not using any reflections, then we actually don't need to worry about the positioning too much. Only once we add the reflections in, that's when we need to worry about the position of the object. So let's turn on the reverb again. And let's turn on the object. Now we have the object, the dry signal going into the object and the wet signal going into the bed. And obviously if we now change the position of the object, for example if we move it to the left, probably should rotate that like that, for example, so that we have everything to the left. That's also what we did with the Space Lab Ignition plugin. We now have to do the same thing for the reverb as well. So let's open up I've already have it on the left side, so I can, for example, move that here. And once again, if I only have the reverb, the position here doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, but if I'm working with reflections, then obviously it does. And I can use that creatively, kind of sometimes it might make sense, or it might be interesting to see what's happening if I'm changing the position of the object in the reverb to a different position than I have the original object, meaning that the reflections are coming from different directions. So you can use that in creative ways as well. Now, obviously, if you want to automate the position of the object by automating the coordinates in the AmbiPanner, we also need to make sure that we are automating the position of the object in the DearVR Pro plugin accordingly. And just as a reminder, in the DearVR Pro plugin, we have folded everything down into a mono channel. Now, if the left and the right channel are not too far separated, then that is perfectly fine. However, if you have, for example, a left channel completely on one side and the right channel completely on the other, it might make sense to add an additional track so that you can separate out the left channel and the right channel, also by calculating, also when you calculate the reverb. So this is really everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. If you found that video interesting, please don't forget to press the like button. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join my Discord community. An invite link is in the description below. And if you found that particular video interesting, watch out for another one. I'm currently working on a solution where I use free software only, because these tools that we have used so far are actually quite expensive. So the question is, can I do the same thing with free software? And the answer to that is yes, you can, but it's not as straightforward. So I've not yet found a way that I feel comfortable enough to actually turn into a video, but I'm pretty sure that this will come very, very soon. Until then, see you at the next video.